Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Vita Jackman Kuwabara, and welcome to the plenary, The Future of Social Media. We are the product at the 39th Annual World Affairs Conference. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You've joined the presentation using your computer speaker system by default and are muted. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording. And a note for attendees, the communication platform to be used to communicate important information through today is the WAC page on the Instagram at WACAffairsCon. Today, we are honored to have our speaker here with us, Mr. David Carroll. Mr. Carroll is currently an associate professor of media design at Parsons School of Design at the New School and formerly the director of the MFA Design and Technology graduate program. His teacher and research delves into the realms of technology and all things digital media, giving a critical outlook on shifts in digital advertising, data rights, privacy, surveillance, social media, and more. Carroll was featured in the 2019 Netflix documentary, The Great Hack, which exposed the dark side of social media and big data by looking into the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. Cambridge Analytica was able to influence the 2016 US presidential election by harvesting data from millions of American voters for political advertising. The film detailed Carroll's personal data quest to legally challenge the company and recover his own data. And during today's 25-minute session, we will be able to dive deep into all of these fascinating topics. So David, thank you again for being here with us.
I'm so glad to be here and to be participating in this wonderful conference. So thank you so much.
Yeah, okay, let's get started. So you're a professor at the New School. What made you want to get into design and teaching, and what piqued your interest in social media and technology?
So some of it was just sort of being born at the right time, um, meaning, when I was in high school, the internet was in its nascent form with dial-up internet, so-called bulletin board systems. And when I graduated college, it was the late 90s and the internet was exploding as a new potential. And then after grad school, it was the year 2000. And so really just entered into the industry that was flourishing and went through several stages of boom and bust. And so in some ways, the Cambridge Analytica scandal serves as another boom bust cycle for the tech industry. So it's just been a process of kind of growing up into this industry and participating in it and making things. And when you know how the sausage is made, then you're able to speak to it. And so many of my students go off to work in the industry. And so I've always felt a responsibility to explain how the industry works. And sometimes it's not always savory.
Right, yeah, I totally understand that. And I think for us as high school students, we have been born into this generation of media. So it's definitely going to be a huge option for us if looking into careers and things like that. So I think we all know that 2021 has kicked off in a very interesting way. On January 6th, we bore witness to the insurrection at Capitol Hill in DC and its aftermath. So in light of these recent events, what are your thoughts on it and the role of media in politics, kind of given that the portrayal of the event varied on different media platforms?
Certainly, the events of January 6th were a pivotal historical moment that will be remembered for generations to come and seem to be a culmination of years of building up this tension, so a kind of boiling over. But I think it's also created the moment for significant change. That change tends to happen in a single moment, all at once, and then evens out to a kind of equilibrium. So I think we're in the moment of kind of shaking out into the post January 6th world. But with that, I think it's interesting to look at how the lies that were told around the election are coming home to roost, in the sense that those who um, disseminated such false information about our democracy are starting to be punished for that flagrant disrespect for the basis of our country. And so I think it's a moment of reckoning for the whole country and an ecosystem that created this condition.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think there's definitely something to do with misinformation and disinformation and kind of that balance. And also, I think as we're high school students, even though a lot of us won't be eligible to vote just yet in our respective countries, I think it's so vital to be aware of these things and our rights and exactly what's going on because eventually this is the stuff we're going to have to face when we're kind of in power as a generation, and how we get to stimulate change in our given nations. To slightly shift the topic, I remember watching The Great Hack when it came out, and it really resonated with me. So, your appearance in the film showcased your journey to recover your own data. So, can you briefly explain your perspective on the Cambridge Analytica scandal and what made you want to get your data back specifically?
Sure, thanks. So interestingly, kind of going in reverse, uh, spoiler alert, the film ends with me saying that I'll probably never get my data back because at that time I felt very pessimistic that I would actually achieve my goal. And interestingly, in the months leading up to the 2020 presidential election, the British broadcaster Channel 4 showed up at my house and gave me the data that I was looking for so long. So it was a happy ending to the story, but it was unfortunate that a journalist had to give me my data when the UK regulator, the so-called data cops, were not able to do that. So it was a victory for the free press and heroic acts of journalism, but it was not a victory for the data cops who are supposed to protect us from the bad guys. And giving me my data through the law enforcement would have been the sort of expression of justice that showed that the system is healthy. But the fact that they couldn't do that and the fact that journalists had to do it means that the system is not healthy. That it took basically an anonymous source leaking the Trump 2016 database in its entirety to journalists to then report on it. It means the data is still circulating. It's not safe. It's not secured. So that's a lesson to be learned that we have so much work to do still to make rights available and then enforceable. And can the data cops do their job when there are clear data crimes? Or are we going to continue to be reliant on journalists? So that's sort of the big lesson. A sort of more technical lesson that I learned is that bankruptcy is a loophole that needs to be closed. That ultimately the company was guilty of abusing the data of all registered voters in the United States and people in many other countries as well. And they would have been liable for those violations. In the UK, the violation was up to £10,000 per violation. And so that meant that all registered voters were victims. That's more than 150 million people entitled to potentially £10,000 each. So a fine in the trillion of dollars. And the reason why it didn't get enforced is that when a company goes out of business, it then is protected from lawsuits. And so I was not able to finish the lawsuit when they went out of business. And so there's a loophole here that still remains that if you wanted to do what Cambridge Analytica did, you could do it again. And when you get caught, just go to business and you won't get in trouble. And so there's a lot of work we have to do to make sure that the bad guys don't get away with it again.
Right. Thank you so much for that. I think exactly. It's like we need more awareness in general to the public. And also, again, there's just so much that hasn't been done to protect us. And kind of building off of that, a following question is just in what ways is our data being protected currently? And what are the challenges of enforcement and accountability while bolstering our digital safety? And I guess where can we improve on this area?
So this varies by nation significantly, that different countries are at different stages of achieving this. So obviously, European member states are ahead of the rest of the world. Um, but in North America, there are things happening. Canada is looking at reforms. Many states in the United States are looking at reforms. California passed a law. Washington State is looking at a law. State of Virginia is looking at a law. New York is looking at a law. So there's a lot of activity in different places, but it's an international effort to there should be basically a competition for the best protection in the world, and everyone should be competing to achieve that. So that's sort of where things stand, and I think the next couple of years will be really important because it's the opportunity to make these reforms in the United States and other places. And so it's an interesting process to observe now. It's really democracy in action, hopefully. So that'll be something to pay close attention to in the coming years.
Right. And to build off that, do you think that even with governments implementing laws, do you think that companies, maybe similar to Cambridge Analytica, will still be able to find those loopholes and kind of harvest our data in a not ethical way?
Yes, I think we have to understand that our data is being harvested by unknown parties using it for unknown purposes, and we have no visibility into that. And until we achieve some visibility into that, we really can't know. So that's why the effort of getting your own data back is an important process, because it then creates the momentum for us to even get visibility into where our data is going, how it's being used, who's using it, and for what purpose. So, for example, this past weekend in the New York Times, they published a really interesting story and visualization of location data from January 6th. And you can see animations of people going from Trump's rally and then going to the Capitol. And this is all because location data was being captured on their phones. And the article shows that, the individuals can be de-anonymized, that they can be reconnected to their identities, that they're not anonymous. And so when we see the privacy abused of people that we don't politically agree with, it's an important moment to recognize that rights are for everyone, even people who you might disagree with. And so when we see, potentially what you might consider a political enemy attacking your government and having their privacy invaded at the same time, it puts us in an awkward position. But it makes us realize that these rights are for everyone. They're civil rights issues, because it means that all protests are being tracked. All the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer were tracked. That there's an invisible tracking system, and we have to lift the veil on it to be able to see what's being seen.
Right. Thank you so much for that. And kind of to connect to your last point on Black Lives Matter and just back to social media, throughout modern history, we've seen that social media has been a tool for good and for bad. We've seen online movements like Black Lives Matter and like me hashtag Me Too. And conversely, we've also seen it spread false information and fueling conspiracies like QAnon and Pizzagate. So, in your opinion, do you think social media has done more good than bad? And do you think that social media, if used incorrectly, could pose as an existential threat?
Sure, the technology and the data can be used for good or evil. They aren't inherently moral. It's how they're used that matters. So data can be used in the democratic process to mobilize voters to participate. The same data can be used to demobilize voters based on racialized characteristics or other issues. So that's why we need rules of the road. That's why we need, ways to deter bad behavior. it's an unregulated space, and it's one of the only unregulated spaces we have in our life. It's the equivalent of having roads without traffic lights and speed limits and cops pulling people over for causing crashes. We need rules of the road. We don't even have lines painted down the middle to see which is the right way to go. So these are very basic things, and I think even a little rule making will have disproportionately positive effects, so that social media can be used for good more than for bad, and same goes with data. But I think we need to look at the underlying business model that we're all participating in, and that is the attention economy, that we are participating in transactions to buy and sell our attention, the limited resource that is constantly being priced without our sensibility. And increasingly, people, especially young people, are getting trapped into the attention economy, thinking that this is how you make a living, by capturing attention because you can get paid for it. And I think we need to be more skeptical as humans over this attention machine that is controlling us. What are we chasing? What is the brain chemistry that's happening when we respond to winning the attention merchandising game? Do we realize it's a game and that the house always wins? So I think there's a seduction to the attention economy that all of us have experienced. If you've ever had a social media post go viral, you you get high on that. And we have to be more wary of that dynamic.
Right. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're approaching the last couple of minutes of our session. So I think we'll move on to the Q&A because I'm seeing some pretty amazing questions from our audience. So thank you, David, for your time to respond to everything that I've asked. So now we're going to begin to answering a few questions submitted during today's presentation. And as a reminder, you can still submit questions through the question pane in your attendees control panel. So the first question is, how would you describe how the public's approach to data and social media in general has changed over the past few decades? I know at first no one thought twice about their data being shared or sharing photos of themselves on social media, but recently people have become more aware.
It is fitting the pattern that happens when new technologies are introduced. That it really changes society, and then society learns to adapt to it better and sets up, rules and boundaries. So, there was a long time where people drove without a seatbelt. And when the seatbelt came, people were like, oh, I have to wear a seatbelt? That's crazy. Now it's like you couldn't imagine not being in a vehicle without seatbelts and airbags all around you. So it's just a process of getting used to our own technical innovations. It's part of being human.
Right, thank you so much. Our next question is, do you believe that modern social media platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, etc., are considered as mature and fully developed platforms? In other words, are the forms of social media platforms already set and will not endure much change in scale in the future? Or do you believe that a higher level of social media will emerge to substitute and fix the major concerns of social media platforms nowadays?
Definitely. Technology and media will continue to evolve in unpredictable ways and will not stay the same. In fact, we've watched things change even just over the past few years. So that change will continue. I would expect social media to move into virtual and augmented reality in the coming years. And I would expect some of the characteristics of social media to change. So, for example, the idea that social media should be a flat and uh, open access kind of environment, the way that Twitter is. Anybody can make a Twitter account and anybody can be equally accessible to anyone else. The president and an ordinary person are basically the same. When we look at the increasing popularity of platforms like Clubhouse, which turn that upside down, where it's no longer about open access and everybody's the same, but is rather about um, the elites and um, VIP access, and no, and people are not all the same. I think the if Clubhouse um, continues to succeed, it will show that there are other ways of thinking about the hierarchies and structures of social media, and that maybe a flat model is inherently problematic. I don't know the answer, but I think there will be change for sure.
Right, for sure. Thank you so much. And our final question is, what are some steps that we can take to protect our own data? And I'm going to build on that just a little bit. Because we're a group of students here, what do you think we as young people will be able to carry into the future to protect our own data?
Sure. So the first thing to do is to see if your national or local government gives you any data rights. The residents of certain countries and certain states are able to get access to their data. So, for example, residents of California, or residents of the EU or other places. So the question is, can you do what I did and ask for your data? And what happens when you get it? And are you satisfied? So you can sort of do democracy. If your local government or national government does not protect your data rights, then you can write to your representatives and say, hey, let's do this. And then the more technical thing to do is to make sure that you're using tracking protection on your devices. I use tools like Disconnect Me or Jumbo Privacy, which install right into your mobile device and install a VPN that blocks trackers embedded in apps. It's not enough to put an ad blocker in your browser because a lot of your data is leaking out in your apps. So the only way to prevent your data from leaking out in your apps is to install tracking control at the device level. And so, for example, to disconnect means that when you're playing that fun mobile game, matching gems on a grid, it's not leaking your location data to unknown third parties to then be able to track you. It blocks that. So not many people know about this. It's not as easy and obvious as an ad blocker in a browser, but I do recommend people do that.
Right. Thank you so much. And thank you again just for being here with us. We're truly honored to have had you, and you gave some really incredible insight. And I feel like I've learned a lot more about data just in this short session, and specifically in the awareness of data and my own rights online, and I guess just how the digital realm plays into our physical world. So I hope everyone has taken away something from the session. I know I have. And a big thank you to everyone for attending our social media plenary. So once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you could complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. Please navigate your Links hub on worldaffairs.ucc.on.ca to attend the following event. Immediately following this plenary at 10:20, we are hosting a networking session on Zoom. This is an opportunity for you to meet other participants and bond over fun prompts in a breakout room. Please refer to your personal schedule on the WAC website for the Zoom link. On behalf of myself, the World Affairs Conference, and our presenters, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.